For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
All right, looks like we are live this evening on Standing for Truth. This is our daily debunking of the critics. We love when they put out their debunking videos because it gives us lots of content, lots of learning and educational material. So thanks for joining this evening. Good to see everybody. Honesty Angel, good to see you. Daniel, Jeremy, thank you so much for the super chat. Guys, I appreciate all the support. Jeremy, that's awesome. Erica, good to see you. Redefine Living says another debunking. That's right. There's going to be, we're having too much fun with these. I got to be honest with you. So let's see. Oh, Brandon says his devolution shirt came in the mail today. Awesome. I hope it fits good. I hope you like the shirt. it's definitely fun to wear around when you're going shopping, maybe spark a debate. If that's the case, film it, we'll post it. So good to see everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun. Now, definitely check out yesterday's stream on specifically the Y chromosome and mutation rate studies, where I addressed Swamidass's arguments as well as Erica's. Now, at the end of Erica's video, she reiterated the same thing that Swamidass said prior in the video. So what I did, I just uploaded it maybe a couple hours ago. Brother Raw, Matt, and myself, we put together just a short 10-minute clip, edited it. We had Erica's portion and then our rebuttal afterwards. So definitely check that out. Today we're going to be breaking down more of Swamidass. Now, at the end of their video too, if I have time, we'll see. I'm going to try and keep this about an hour. Tonight, there may or may not be a debate on John Maddox's channel, so I'm not too sure. But I may do a part 2 where I address Erica's claims on the Y chromosome dissimilarity between chimpanzees and humans. That one I'm really looking forward to, because I just debunked Tony Reed the other day, and he used all the same. Actually, he used more technical arguments than Erica did. So I'm going to have a blast with that one. So yeah, this one specifically, we're going to go through again Joshua Swamidass's section, specifically on his arguments, more so genetic related arguments on TMR4A and PRDM9. And we're going to make this interactive as usual, lots of clips. So why don't we get right into it? Actually, quick announcement. Tomorrow night, we'll have Nephilim Free here and Derek Barnes. They're going to be debating the Genesis flood. So make sure you are here. 9 o'clock. The event should be set. So I'm looking forward to that one. And Sunday, we're going to have a lecture from Salvador Cordova. Our brother Sal, he's going to be giving a lecture on protein probabilities, protein evolution, for example. And he's going to do an after show afterwards. So I think that's all I got for announcements. So why don't we just kind of get right into this? I mean, somebody pointed out that they're looking forward to the 9,000 episode series of this, and at this pace, that's probably what we're looking at. So, let me share screen. Jamie Russell, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. So this one, we're going to be going through a little bit more of their video. It's going to start. I'll break it down. So it's going to start off with Joshua Swamidass. Actually, the first 10 minutes of their interview in this 3-hour video, maybe even more. I listened to it at 2 times speed. And I'm telling you, when you listen to something at 2 times speed for 3.5 hours, when you're done, everything else in your life feels slow motion for the next couple hours. It's an odd feeling. So we're going to play it at 2 times speed, but there wasn't really anything of significance, just introductions, talking about Joshua Swamidass's book. And then they get into their first real point with TMR4A. And then Redefined Living says SFT will make them tap out. Yep, our endurance is like no other. So I definitely believe that they will be tapping out. And then he gets into recombination rates, things like this. Actually, he gets into the Y chromosome, which we already debunked. So I'm going to skip past that. I'll let everybody know at that part to please go check out our 2-hour stream from yesterday. Or if you just want to watch the 10-minute breakdown, check that one out too. And hopefully we'll get through all of that. And then we can put this one behind us and get into the next couple topics. Next week, probably anytime between Tuesday and Friday, we'll be debunking their Age of the Earth sections of that video. Speed of Sound of Gravity says you really can't be this dense. Speed of Sound of Gravity, he has earned a top position on Team Dodgeball. He's been dodging, he's been ducking, he's been dipping, he's been dodging all over the place. We've put out a couple videos challenging him on mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic systematics. No response. He wants people to think those videos aren't out there. He attempted to debunk our Dr. Jonathan Sarfati portion of the interview on abiogenesis, where Sarfati just did. I mean, there's no defense of abiogenesis, folks. There's no defense of universal common ancestry. Speed of Sound believes that pine trees, whales, humans, and banana plants are all related through common ancestry. That's a science fiction based religion, and we've proven that over and over again. He attempted to debunk the abiogenesis. It's like a 22-minute clip. I think he got through like a minute and he gave up, which was funny. Comedy hour with Speed. But Speed, we love you. We love you. You're not doing a very good job refuting us, which is fine. I wouldn't do a good job refuting us either if I was on your side. But chicken and egg problem after chicken and egg problem. In 6 hours of content, these guys in their video, they did not even attempt to address the abiogenesis challenge, which means naturalistic evolution is dead in the water. So anyways, I'm going to share screen. Enough of my rambling. Let's share. Make sure you guys can see this. I made sure to click the audio button. Now I have a lot of content up here. So let's see. So we may as well just start with their video right away. We're going to go 2 times speed so we can get through it. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to let it just play probably for a couple minutes first. But quite frankly, this is funny, okay? I'm going to check, make sure, okay. Jamie Russell says dodge, dip, dive, and dodge. Yeah, 5 Ds of dodge. So Speed is on the team. He's a bench warmer at this point, but Dan, Dr. Dan, he hasn't put out an argument in a while. So pretty soon we may just kick him off the team and we'll put Speed on the team as the starting 5. So anyways, quite frankly, this portion of the video is kind of tedious because I've literally addressed all of these arguments. And Erica, being the amazing dodgeball player that she is, clearly did not watch my last 5 videos on this topic and therefore did not update her video here, making this so easy for me. The entire video is incredibly easy as you guys are going to see, because I put out a series of videos debunking Swamidass and the Peaceful Science blog on TMR4A and their genetics claims, genetic diversity. So here's what happened, though. They filmed this interview before I put those videos out, and then they never updated it to address the arguments that I used to refute what you're going to see in this video. So it's funny. It's funny. So let's see. Yeah, let's get right into it. Once I play it, make sure that you guys give me the A-OK on sound. And okay, let's go. All righty.
Of the methodology, clarification of terms, all these kinds of things are really important so that not only we can,
Oh, lagging a bit. Let's let it load.
Be properly reviewed by colleagues, but so that this can be accurately represented to the public if and when it does reach them. So tell us about your work, the most recent 4 alleles.
Redefined Living says Standing for Truth is doing predictive debunking. Yes. What's funny is the Tony Reed video where I go into the Y chromosome dissimilarity and I go into the actual paper itself, go into the palindromes, the ampliconic regions. It was funny because it was killing 3 birds with 1 stone, because Speed of Sound attempted a really lousy rebuttal. And then Erica she only spent like 2 minutes on that subject in her entire 3.5-hour video, didn't even address the questions I asked. And Tony Reed, he tried to debunk it too. So in that one Tony Reed video, I was able to debunk all 3. But because Erica just released this video after the Tony Reed video, I'm going to have a lot of fun with that portion. Honesty Angel says echo. Yeah, I noticed at first when I'm screen sharing the audio, there is an echo, but hopefully it goes away. And maybe the echo is going to be worse now that I'm on two times speed. I'm not sure. Not really sure how to fix that, but I think when you share screen, share audio, it's just inevitable there's going to be an echo. But we'll keep our fingers crossed that it fixes, the more that it plays. So here we go, guys.
Yeah, so what you're getting at is we did some work to look at when the most recent 4 allelic lineages arise, or time to most recent 4 alleles that you can see when you look at human genetic data. To just jump ahead, it turns out that that the time you compute is around 500,000 years ago. And for a lot of different ways of understanding Adam and Eve, we'll talk about that in a moment. What I want to do is list out the different ways that you can think about Adam and Eve.
Absolutely.
But if you're going to say that we all of us got all of our genetic information from Adam and Eve by direct descent from them, that means that Adam and Eve would have to be, if they had biology similar to us, they'd have to be 500,000 years ago in the past or more ancient. And that works for some Christians. Like that's the view that some Catholics take, and William Lane Craig, who I've been working with too.
You guys are probably used to me pausing every 10 seconds and going on an hour rant debunking what they said. But guys, I'm just going to let this play just for a couple minutes. So don't think that I fell asleep or you need to call 911. Let's let them get through their arguments, and then we'll systematically demolish it word by word.
He's kind of going down that path, and that makes sense to him. And evidence just doesn't tell us either way really how big the human population was back then.
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, and that deviates though pretty strongly from young Earth creationism, the way how it's typically presented. Now, I don't want to say that it proves young Earth creationism wrong. I think what I would say is that that it leaves a really big question for them. How do they make sense of that data? And they haven't really responded to that yet. And it does seem to rule out a lot of different models. Maybe there's other models that make sense, but most of them don't seem to make sense.
Right. So if you would, for our audience, or maybe some laymen out there, could you explain to us why it would be difficult to take current genetic data and extrapolate backwards into populations of the past?
Yeah. So to extrapolate, to infer that, well, there's just a lot that we don't see. It turns out we do get a lot of really powerful, important, and interesting information about our past through DNA, but it just doesn't tell us everything. We tend to see it as if it was kind of like the Eye of Sauron from, you can just look anywhere with like godlike ability or nearly godlike ability. Yeah. It's a lot more like a streetlight in Manhattan. You can learn a lot about. There's a lot you can learn about, from a streetlight, or maybe like a series of streetlights. But it's just a streetlight. There's a lot of stuff that's outside. There's a story that a lot of scientists like to tell each other. I first heard it when I was an undergrad from George Shandy, who was a biologist at University of California, Irvine, in his group I was studying. And he said, and this isn't his story. I mean, people said it for like about 100 years, I think, in science. Science is like a streetlight. There's like a story about this. This police officer comes upon a man kind of searching through all the bushes underneath the streetlight trying to find his keys. And the police officer gets in there and starts helping him, trying to help him find it, and says, "Okay, so you lost your keys here, and you're trying to find it." And he says, "Well, no, I lost it over there." And he points down the street. He's like, "Well, wait a minute, why are you looking here?" He said, "Because this is where the streetlight is. There's a light over there, so I look here where the light is."
Right. Yeah. That's such a perfect way of putting it.
Yeah, and so the thing about it is yeah, it's right. Science gives us light. Genetic information gives us light, but it doesn't give us the light that we need to answer all the questions.
Right. It's spotty, and it can help us. It's like looking at a jigsaw puzzle that's 40% complete. You might start to get an idea of the complete picture, but until more information comes to light, it's a suggestion.
Well, it's even worse than that. As you go back in time, it's blurrier and blurrier and blurrier.
Right.
And we can have our preconceptions of where things are, but that doesn't mean there's hard evidence.
Right. The puzzle starts to be it goes from a 24-piece puzzle with half the pieces missing to a 1,000-piece puzzle where you've only got 10% of it complete.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the way I put it in the book I wrote is that science is a little bit, like genetics, I would say, is a little bit like a streetlight, where it gives you a very good view of our very close genealogical ancestry and relationships. It's a little like a telescope too, and that it can tell us a lot about population histories in the distant past. Like there's very good evidence that we share common ancestry with the great apes. You can see that in our genomes. But it has real blind spots. It has if you're looking at a telescope, if I'm looking at a telescope, it's something way down there. I might see something miles and miles away, but I wouldn't be able to see my wife sitting right next to me.
What he says there is funny. It's kind of like the low quality, low confidence science, that being the fossil record, where when you're looking at the fossil record, that is extremely fragmentary, extremely interpretive, where you can hope, dream, and imagine all day. It's like you're looking through a straw or a telescope, like he says. And you're making interpretations on these bone fragments, for example, when in fact your blinders are on. You can't see everything around you. You can't see the bigger picture. That's where genetics comes into play. And that's where at least Dr. Joshua Swamidass, Evo Grad, Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, that's at least where they go right, is they acknowledge how important genetics is. Genetics is direct. It's the direct way to determine ancestry, okay? With bones found in the dirt, low confidence science, aka the fossil record, you can make up any story you want. So it's funny that he's pointing this out. Erica's laughing, but that's Erica's specialty, is low confidence, low quality science. So I do like the fact that at least Swamidass and people like Dr. Cardinal, they do admit that genetics, it's our traits, it's our genes that are inherited sperm and egg, not a rock, not some bone fragment, not geography, not geology. So let's continue.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it works, where it doesn't actually give us nearly the detailed view as we might think about the past. And so if you get back about 500,000 years ago or so, it's very hard to know much about an Adam and Eve back then.
Humans, like nearly all other mammals, are diploid animals. This means we have two alleles at each genetic locus, one inherited from each parent. Using known rates, we can track backwards allelic diversity and generate a time for when the last most recent 4 alleles shared by all living humans existed. Dr. Swamidass has calculated this to be around 500,000 years. This, of course, falls in line with evolutionary theory and conventional timelines for the age of Earth. So how do creationists deal with the concept of the most recent 4 alleles? It turns out there are around 4 models.
Let's look at a couple of these interpretations models.
Okay, so this is why I love the 2 times speed. We got through that part. Let me address a few things first, okay, guys? Before I get into the TMR4A, which I've done so many times, I want to point out that their allele frequency distribution argument has been completely dismantled, okay, guys? Please see the allele frequencies paper by Sanford and Carter that I frequently reference for the numbers and modeling on that. Or even check out our interview for a brief explanation on allele frequency patterns and how they actually fit perfectly with the Adam and Eve model of origins. You know what? I think I might even have, let's see, for you guys that want to track down the paper. Let's see if I got it here for you. Let's see. That's the Eve mitochondrial sequence, consensus sequence. Because the numbers are there, the modeling is there, but I'm not going to go through all the numbers, of course. I want you guys to check it out, look into it. So here it is. Adam, Eve, design diversity, and allele frequencies. So definitely check out that paper, read through it. It's so funny because arguments were being employed by these critics, such as Dan, that were directly addressed in Adam and Eve, design diversity, and allele frequencies. And they've tapped out. They've admitted defeat on that end. But now they're bringing up more questions, right? Like recombination. How can you explain some of the hypervariable regions, things like that? So we're going to get into that. But that's the paper. Definitely check that out. So here's the thing. Take a look too. Dr. Carter, he actually just put out an awesome in-depth video out on all of that paper, all within just 15 minutes with the modeling and numbers shown. In a nutshell, guys, here's all you need to know, okay? All we need is, and the modeling works, the numbers work actually far better than the evolutionary model, which is amazing because it didn't have to be true. You know, the numbers don't lie, especially when you're using realistic parameters and well thought out starting point. So here's the thing. All we need is created heterozygosity in Adam and Eve, designed alleles, of course, as well as created functional DNA elements that I frequently discuss, like the retrotransposons, the ALUs. These, I like to refer to these as variation-inducing genetic elements, okay? Mutations over time, genetic drift is important, selection, inbreeding, and a bottleneck at the flood. All biblical, all biblical. And all of these considered, you actually get exactly what we see today in terms of allele frequency curves, as well as what we see in terms of DNA and DNA element function. Okay. In terms of alleles, again, we get very few common alleles and many, many rare alleles. The mutations actually overwhelm the created genetic diversity carried in Adam and Eve. Now, the funny thing is that the evolutionary model did not fit the data, okay, when it was modeled using their starting points, their parameters, and the modeling nearly, as well as the created heterozygosity model, it fit perfectly. Not even the evolutionary model didn't even come close. It's so easy to get a modern allele frequency distribution starting with Adam and Eve, while the evolutionary model gave worse results. The evolutionary model is not predictive. This is why informed evolutionists, at least, will not use the allele frequency distribution and patterns as an argument. I think Speed of Sound's still using that one, so he needs to update himself. By the way, I want to point out brother Otangelo Grasso. He's got a review of David Neff and Company's review at Speed's channel. That's going to be, looks like 8:15. So when you're done here, check that out. Also, I want to point out that, I mean, there's so many parts of this video we're so excited to debunk. Erica fails miserably at trying to refute Dr. Jensen's predictions on the history of civilization on the Y chromosome. And the notes we have debunking that are, you guys are going to love it. So when we get to that section, we may just edit a video for that one and upload it for you guys. But I mean, oh, too much fun. Too much fun. So anyways, we got that out of the way. Now, here's the thing. This TMR4A, time to most recent 4 alleles, as Erica just showed in her visual. Swamidass only pretends, and this is a fact. They can't refute me. They haven't even attempted. And I like to see that the genetic diversity video where I debunked Swamidass, he can't come back from that one. It's irrefutable. I'm sorry. I made sure of that. I like to see that it's being shared on Facebook. That's awesome. Share that one around, and hopefully Swamidass corrects himself at some point. So he pretends to assume our model of created heterozygosity, then fails, for one, to apply the correct definition of allele, which would be, of course, the position definition of allele. There are 4 alleles per DNA position with millions of positions in the genome, and thus millions of alleles. This is another thing Speed of Sound can't seem to comprehend or understand. What's funny is you're going to see here that Swamidass, in a little bit, in a couple minutes, he actually does now apply the proper definition because I've corrected him in the Peaceful Science page. And I'm not even sure if he realizes it. Now this destroys the TMR4A argument. Actually, no, he does realize it. That's why their next argument is, well, recombination's too slow. Well, we're gonna leave no stone unturned. Okay, so here's the thing. When you consider the correct definition of allele, the fact that we'd have millions of positions in the genome and thus millions of alleles, an allele is a flavor of a gene, okay? Now, here's the thing. He also fails to assume, this one's funny. This is the biggest reason why he's Joshua Swamidass. He fails to assume that God would have obviously created these design variants in functional and helpful linkage groups. In order to what? In order to allow for the necessary recombination that would take place in the first place. That's what they were designed to do. These guys, like Swamidass, he wants to say, "Oh, see, I'm assuming created heterozygosity, and it still doesn't work." And then they're using arguments that would assume that God front-loaded Adam and Eve with these design variants, okay, these designed alternatives. But then, oops, the infinite God forgot to place them in areas within the genome that can segregate and recombine in the first place. So the next time you hear him say, that he's assuming the created heterozygosity model, these are just a few reasons why that's not the case. It's his own version of created heterozygosity. Okay, so obviously God would have designed these variants in functional and beneficial linkage groups, okay? This results in change, variation, and adaptation. But worst of all, here's another assumption. He doesn't assume a perfect genome. This is obvious by the fact that you're going to see in this video, and I'm going to prove it. He understands almost nothing about what? The PRDM9 gene. And the fact that more working PRDM9 genes means better and more effective recombination rates, and thus faster recombination rates. They can't debunk this. I'm going to prove this directly from a mainstream paper on this issue. They avoided all this in this video because Erica wrongfully took forever to make her video. She did this interview with Swamidass. Then I put out a series of videos that she clearly didn't watch. One of them was titled Debunking Peaceful Science Discourse. So therefore now she says this is her final video. I predict it won't be, because she's going to see how detrimental our series is and she'll be forced to respond. Now, here's the thing. We don't care if she responds. She thinks that her responding is necessary for us. No, we have, if I showed you the list of videos, so far for our Another Evolutionist Bites the Dust series, we've gone through Professor Dave, Aaron Ra, Tony Reed, Vice Rhino. If you've seen the list of videos I have from these big shots on YouTube that refuse to debate, you would see that we have content for you guys for a lifetime. So if this really is Erica's final video, this is good. We're going to demolish it piece by piece, then we can get back to our Another Evolutionist Bites the Dust series. But this isn't looking too good for them. See, what she should have done was maybe did a follow-up interview with Swamidass and asked him the necessary questions refuting his position. So this was kind of just, it almost looks like I hired Erica to put out such an unimpressive interview with Swamidass just to give me easy content to debunk. Just kidding. She's not working for me. Okay, so more PRDM9 genes. That's where I was at. This means more superior recombination rates and thus faster recombination rates. Okay, this is supported by the data, as I'm going to show later. There's no magical recombination in the past, as you see they're going to accuse us of. Just logic, science, and empirical evidence. Now the real, okay, the real created heterozygosity hypothesis, guys, suggests millions of heterozygous gene sites. Let me say that again. Millions of heterozygous gene sites. And with the position definition of allele, there would be what? I'll leave a pause so when they're watching this video, they can answer it and debunk themselves. Mr. Swamidass and Gutsick, Dodgeball, Gibbon, what would there be? That's right. Good job, guys. Gold stars for the both of you. There would be millions of lines in both Adam and millions in Eve. So which alleles are we converging on, guys? Because this whole TMR4A does not assume the real created heterozygosity model, as I've shown. This TMR4A analysis, this is what it's doing, okay? And Erica briefly went over it in her well done edited clip earlier. It is tracing, okay? It's tracing the origin of our autosomal DNA differences back in time. And this analysis incorporates both recombination and mutation, okay? I understand how this analysis works, but it doesn't refute our model. Now, Swamidass, or the researcher, the scientist involved in this analysis, they'll now follow lineages. And this TMR4A, okay, tying to most recent 4 alleles, the point of this is where 4 lineages are present in the human population. Now, what point would this be according to the Adam and Eve model that assumes the real front-loaded genetic diversity? Well, this would be a point where 2 lineages could be present in Adam, okay, in a heterozygous state, of course, and also 2 in Eve in a heterozygous state as well. But here's the thing, and I'm getting ahead of myself. Remember, when you correctly assume what we're purporting is created heterozygosity, there would be millions of lines in both Adam and millions in Eve, just from creation, just from the initial creation event, where God actually front-loaded those genetic diversity, those genetic DNA differences, okay? So here's the thing. The entire TMR4A analysis still treats every difference as the result of mutation, because all it is really doing, guys, is it's tracing their mutational heritage. That's a good way to put it. Their heritage in a more sophisticated way. Now, based on what we've been talking about here, and all of these streams I've already covered this in, debunking these specific claims, the created heterozygosity hypothesis treats millions of DNA variants as the result of de novo creation. So if we were to accept the terms used in this TMR4A analysis, the real model that we start with, not the one that Swamidass pretends to assume, we would be looking at, okay, after all this is said and done, we're looking at millions of lineages in Adam and millions in Eve, okay? Now they've tapped out on that, which is why they go to the recombination rates now as a supposed issue. But let's let them finish what they're saying here.
Absolutely.
So we'll talk about a few of them. The first one we'll talk about is a straw man of their position, and I think it's been really used in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea there is that Adam and Eve are homozygous clones. They each have two genomes, like two copies of a genome, right? So there's 4 copies, but they're all the same. They're all copies of the same thing. They're all identical down to the base pair.
Cookie cutter. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been howling for years that that's a total straw man of their position, and I agree. That is probably the most implausible understanding of Adam and Eve possible. Okay, and so that means that all genetic diversity that we see today has to arise somehow by natural processes afterwards from that. Okay, so the idea there is that they're homozygous clones, which, to be clear, is not like humans today. We don't see anyone today that is a homozygous person on every site. We don't see anyone alive today that's a homozygous clone of another person. Like, so this is a completely bizarre view of what, I mean, it would not be humans like us.
Right.
And then by natural processes, things kind of diverge from there, and that's where we get all the diversity, in the world. And of course, there's the Noahic bottleneck with Noah, with him, his 3 children, his wife, and their 3 wives. Two, which we'll get to in a moment, but that's there too. But then from there, it's just natural processes. So that just turns out to be very inconsistent with data, and we'll see that really quickly when we look at the time to most recent single allele in a moment, too, which we could talk about. But for the time to most recent 4 alleles, that means that they wouldn't even have 4 alleles. They only really have 1 allele, or 1 version, 1 flavor of DNA for each position in their genome.
Right, just repeated multiple times.
Yeah, and so that's a problem, right? So that's the first one.
Model then.
I can't help myself. I just want to say one thing here, okay? Here's what's funny. Even Swamidass here, clearly a militant critic against young Earth creation, even he admits that a non-starting point of created heterozygosity, okay, a heterozygous Adam and Eve, is a straw man argument. Funny coming from him. So these years of me debating, after 80 debates, roughly 60 formal ones, where I point this out, okay, I point this out all the time to godless engineer, but you can't expect him to bring forth an actual coherent argument, okay? I mean, let's get real. Even him, I've corrected that. Listen, this whole argument that there's too much diversity today assumes that God would not have front-loaded Adam and Eve with created units of DNA function. Front-loaded diversity. This makes no sense, because when God said, be fruitful and multiply, did he want that to be done and carried out through cloning? No, that's the problem. So at least Swamidass admits this, which is funny, because now this should force all your critics, okay, to not use a straw man argument. Now, if Swamidass went all the way and assumed the full model, the logical model, then he would be a young Earth creationist. But he can't. He can't.
His clones is indeed a straw man, so it's not really relevant, but it's still worth mentioning as it doesn't actually work. The homozygous clones simply cannot generate enough diversity for what we see in the modern human population, particularly when up against the explanatory power of the conventional science model.
The second model that's been important is looking at them and saying, okay, maybe they weren't clones and they were heterozygous, meaning that they had different flavors of DNA for every single position in their genome. Right,
in a way that would maximize diversity.
Yeah, and that's entirely possible. That's possible, right? That's a much more reasonable model. That's what Nathaniel Jensen has talked about.
It is a much more reasonable model. So you guys like godless engineer, and you guys that couldn't pass a basic science exam, speed of sound. Hopefully he's not using the homozygous argument either. And here's the funny thing. Those ones that want to scoff at the starting position of front-loaded genetic diversity, those are the same ones that have no answer to abiogenesis. Those are the same ones that won't answer I challenge them. They want us to address the so-called heat problem, and we will. Now I want you to go through, and they're not 3-hour videos, no excuse. I mean, she's got 5 hours of content that I've been watching, and I'm having fun debunking. There's no excuse. Especially when you can listen to it at 2 times speed like this. It's awesome. Go debunk our Dr. Ryan Hayes video. Debunk the Dr. Jonathan Sarfati interview. Debunk Dr. Rob Stadler. I've also reiterated the abiogenesis challenge all within 10 minutes in a lot of my previous videos on the chicken and egg problems that I want an empirical answer for. Therefore, the most plausible starting point based on the science is created heterozygosity.
What John Sanford and Rob Carter have talked about, and that's, I think, where they believe their current models are.
Right. Okay. Do their models differ, Jensen's and Sanford/Carter's?
Well, what's interesting is that Jensen has his way of making a case for it. Sanford and Carter have their own way of making a case for it. and they're different. There's no overlap in the case they make. They don't really cite each other, which is a little strange.
It's completely in each method is completely independent from the other.
Well, I mean,
but do you see here, guys, how this was supposed to be the slam dunk part of the interview, of the video? This was supposed to be the slam dunk. This is the one that they said, wait for our little surprise. But do you see how easy it is to refute on the spot? You didn't need a month. Just do it on the spot. Let it play. Refute it sentence by sentence. You've seen it yesterday with the Y chromosome. Wait till you see us address her argument against Jensen's predictions that she finally got to after like 6 months worth of debates, where she kept saying Jensen's not even working on the predictions, and I just keep pointing over and over again to the research project. Then she made the big mistake of copying the peaceful science discourse for her arguments. It's not going to look good. It didn't look good for her yesterday either, and her only rescue device was the whole genome rates too. And yeah, check that out, guys. It's getting worse for them the more they speak. So let's keep going.
Conceptually they're not, but they do it very differently.
Yeah, in methodology.
So finding a problem with Jensen's approach doesn't necessarily mean finding a problem. And they're dealing with different types of DNA and all that. But underlying it, the underlying model they're using is the same.
Right.
And then they both hint about the third model we'll talk about in a moment, but they don't actually go there because they don't think they need to yet. And that's okay. So maybe all that happens is we look at the data more, we find out, okay, this model doesn't work, and there's another version of creationism that does. And I'm open to that. Let's just see if that works.
Right. Let's engage with the data in an honest way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a real mistake to, I mean, I'm not a young Earth creationist, but I think it's a mistake to make a strong man creationist just because one young Earth creationist model doesn't mean they all are. But what I can say is I haven't yet seen one that really makes sense of all the data.
Well, they do work, Joshua, when you don't assume a straw man version of created heterozygosity, like assuming that God would have not, and we're going to touch on this more later, that God would have not placed these designed alternatives in helpful linkage groups where they were put there to design, to segregate and recombine in the first place. That makes no sense. And then also use a straw man version of the PRDM9 gene. We're going to get into all that later, so let's keep going.
Right. Yeah.
Without invoking tons and tons of ad hoc miracles, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, and that's the whole crux of it, right? It's if I am of the position that if a younger Christians would like to invoke miracles, that's and hold that ideology and belief system, that's okay with me. My as a personal individual is when they come at it from an angle of this is all empirically supported exactly the way we were saying it.
This is interesting. I had the privilege of spending some time with John Stanford a couple years ago and asked about this.
Well, remember what I said earlier about the allele frequencies, the patterns, the distribution. That was an argument they were using for such a long time. They ain't using it anymore, at least the informed evolutionists, because it's been destroyed. And the modeling and the numbers and the math fit far better with the young Earth creation model and the starting point of Adam and Eve that were front-loaded with genetic diversity as compared to the evolutionary model that says we are related to banana plants and humans and banana plants ultimately descend through billions and billions of years of incremental changes, descent with modification, descend from a single-celled-like ancestor that ultimately evolved through a process known as abiogenesis from non-living chemicals in some nice warm pond or whatever. I mean, whatever they invoke, whether it's metabolism first, RNA world, okay, whatever they invoke is riddled with chicken and egg problems. Here's why they don't want to take the challenge, though. Now they're forced to start with the created heterozygosity, but here's why they won't take the challenge, because they know we've got a number of PhD chemists just waiting to come back on to debunk their taking of the challenge. Remember what happened to Professor Dave?
And they really are not trying to invoke ad hoc miracles. That's why they're kind of starting with something that has Adam and Eve as normal people going forward, and they're only trying to move from there as they need to, because they know that if you start adding in strange things, it will start to look. I mean, because it's in the simplest way, you could just say that it's all a miracle. God's just making miracles all the time. It just ends up looking this way. We don't know why. It just happens like that way. And yeah, so I guess that's a model for young inspirations that could work. It's kind of a little bit like on follows, or seems to make God a little bit deceptive. But you could say that, right? But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to see, okay, well, let's try and build a plausible model and see if we can actually test this using scientific means. And so I'm open to doing that. But the second model was, like I said, that, and that's I think where the time to most recent 4 alleles, and also we can talk about time to most recent 10 alleles, is pretty valuable in testing if we want to think in the way about it too. And I think that rules it out.
Time to most recent 10, time to most recent 4. It still shows a lack of understanding, okay, by Swamidass that accepting the terms used in both of those analyses, the real created heterozygosity model, not the one he's pretending to assume, we would be looking at millions of lineages in both Adam and Eve. Millions in Adam, millions in Eve. I cannot emphasize that enough.
And we can talk about that in a moment, but I want to go through the next other models that you take.
This second model starts with the 4 unique created heterozygous alleles, but unfortunately just doesn't have enough time to generate the required diversity for what we see from the data. It fails miserably because there isn't enough time. Neither Sanford nor Carter, both of which propose the created heterozygosity that we see in Model 2, have even addressed the problem, let alone proposed a solution.
So the models that they've really put out there, but haven't moved to yet. Kind of put it out there as like a possible place they might move to. But Reasons to Believe has recently published a little bit and talking about how they're moving to that model too. It's to just accept the idea, well, maybe Adam and Eve don't actually have the same biology as us.
Right.
And in fact, their reproductive cells, either their ovaries or their testes, or maybe both their ovaries and testes, have different genomes in each cell, right?
Right.
And so then, if Adam and Eve have 20 kids, that could be 40 different alleles, right?
Yeah, they're all completely uniquely diverse, right?
The Eve mosaicism model, that's an interesting model too that would actually explain the diversity. Now, I don't think it's necessary based on what we know, and as long as we defined allele appropriately. Here's the thing, okay? The definition of allele, let's get this out of the way. This came to mind. The definition of allele is kind of slippery and problematic, especially when people are not using it properly. You're going to see that Swamidass is starting to use it correctly. Eric is not, which is good. He took my advice. He didn't really come out fully and correct himself, but at least he's adopting the correct view and definition of it. Think about it. If we only think of a single letter in the genome, then what we would be looking at is obviously 4 alleles. But when we actually consider the entire gene, we are now looking at many numbers of alleles. I'm just going to quote Dr. Carter here, okay? He says, but if you are considering an entire gene, there are as many possible alleles as there are letters to the 4th power, he says. Given many generations, chromosomal recombination can lead to an increasing number of alleles because the initial versions of a gene get what? They get scrambled to make more versions. This is basic. Finally, over 4,500 years has gone by. This is plenty of time to account for the accumulation of a lot of genetic diversity. Take humans. The bulk of our variation is biallelic and spread throughout the world. These variations are great candidates for created diversity. And there is no way to say that God did not front-load Adam and Eve's reproductive cells with many different genomes, meaning that the genetic diversity of humans today may depend in part on how many children they had. There are myriad additional variants that are geographically restricted, Carter says. These are excellent candidates for post-flood mutation. Given that there are over 7 billion people on the planet, and given that we have had thousands of years for variations to arise, why would anyone be surprised that there are genes with more than 2 versions? Okay, it's very, very important to properly define and explain allele.
Yeah, so this does put limits because, I mean, they didn't have 1 million children. I mean, you start doing some math to see how long their lives actually were. And, hopefully Eve isn't barefoot and pregnant her entire lifetime. But you can get some sense of, okay, so maybe there's, some number of people. I think, if I remember right, A.J. Roberts, the Reasons to Believe, suggested maybe up to 26 children might be reasonable, maybe.
Right.
Okay.
So it's coming up with a maximum number of children she could have and then seeing if the data could potentially match with that.
Yeah, and so with that, then that means that if that's the case, so that means that however many children you have, you can multiply by 2, and that's how many alleles that could be held within that first population.
Right.
And that would be different than Adam and Eve. So the first model, you only have 4 alleles at the beginning. And they 4 alleles per position. Of course, there's millions of positions.
Here we go. 4 alleles per position. And of course, there's millions of positions, therefore millions of alleles. But then he doesn't logically... Well, no, I think he does see that his TMR4A analysis fails. That's why he has to jump to the recombination rates now. Remember, once one thing's solved, then they go on to their next straw man. So I find this funny that because he's almost repeating word for word what I've corrected him on, which ultimately Dr. Jensen has corrected him on. It's come down through Jensen himself, through his Frello debate.
So it's really millions of alleles, but every position has only 4 alleles. And I mean, at most 4 alleles, and then you kind of see how that spreads out from them. This is a little different because you're not really worried so much about Adam and Eve, but really their family. And their family.
That first generation then is what's being the focus.
Yeah, and so that actually does a lot to help, actually. I mean, maybe you can tolerate up to up to 50 or so, alleles that it goes down to, and that really helps a lot. But the problem then becomes Noah's flood and that bottleneck, because if you think about it, there's going to be 10 alleles.
Right.
There's Noah and his wife, who have 3 kids, but all of them get their DNA from their parents, right? And then there's these 3 other people that they marry, right? So that's 3 other people plus the 2 in the beginning. That's 5 people, right? and then you have times 2, so that ends up with around 20. Sorry, around 10 alleles.
Right.
In reality, it's probably a little bit less than that, but we can go with 10.
Yeah, we'll be generous.
And it turns out if that's the case, and if they all have normal,
But I want to point out too that in this entire video, they never once, for example, Swamidass never really addresses the uniparentally inherited DNA. He never addresses the phylogenetics. How many times have I shown that mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree derived from the 1,000 Genomes Project, human mitochondrial DNA, where the pattern is exactly what we'd expect? Explosive growth from a center point, not a lot of mutations. Mutation rates are fast. Evolution can't explain the data without unrealistic mutation rates, unrealistic substitution rates, unrealistic assumptions, and therefore no predictions because it's pseudoscience. They don't address that through the whole video.
Normal biology, like we expected, the time to the most recent 10 alleles isn't 500,000 years ago. It's about 180,000 years ago.
Right, which is better, but still problematic.
Yeah, well, it works for.
We've already addressed the problem with the TMR4A in great detail. So let's continue where they tap out on that and now say, oh, they have to invoke magical recombination rates. That's the next step now. So we'll let them go through this.
For an older Earth creationist, maybe, right? So that's where it might work for reasons to believe. And so that's kind of Hugh group.
No, because the old Earth creationist has the same problem. They can't explain the uniparentally inherited DNA. They have the same problem with the phylogenetics issue. Too few mutations. Look at the Y chromosome. You guys are going to see this when I do the video on the dissimilarity between chimp and human Y chromosome. Very little variation. Very little variation in men worldwide when it comes to the Y. Okay? This is why the rescue device fails. It mutates fast, the Y chromosome. But yet, every single male Y chromosome is nearly identical. The only way to keep a Y chromosome that's changing fast, and when you map it out in phylogenetics, the Y chromosomes are all nearly identical, is because the Y chromosome is young. I mean, it's just basic. And same goes with the mitochondrial DNA. So that's the problem. The two DNA compartments where we can agree the differences in those DNA compartments are the result of mutations over time, they don't want to deal with. They don't want to deal with. They want to stick around in the nuclear DNA where they can straw man, where they can make stories, where they can misrepresent. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's hilarious.
Maybe that makes sense for them. I mean, it's still a little weird. I mean, you kind of have Adam and Eve with this really strange biology. The way they explain it, which might make some sense, is that there's actually good theological reason to believe that would be the case, because they're going to be founding this population. God wants it to be, to have like an initial boost of diversity. So they're not all, breeding essentially.
Funny how when you add up the genealogies in Scripture, and when you take the Genesis account of human origins literally, God created two people, Adam and Eve, just roughly 6,000 years ago. Isn't that funny when you look at the paternal line, when you look at the mitochondrial DNA line, where the mitochondrial DNA is passed down from mothers, Y chromosome from fathers? Isn't it funny how it all works out perfectly? It's all consistent, yet it didn't have to be. It didn't have to be.
They're not all inbred, right?
Right.
And so, it's a miracle, but it's all that miracle is just in the creation of Adam and Eve. It's not.
Now, the old Earth creationists, they go wrong because now they have a problem with the so-called hominids, your Neanderthals, Floresiensis, Heidelbergensis, Erectus. They have to say that most of these are animals. No. When you actually just accept the data for what it is, then it makes sense that what these are not pre-humans, not primitive humans. They're 100% human, made in the image of God, where when you become isolated, especially on islands, or when you become isolated in the way the Neanderthals were, then what occurs is inbreeding. Rapid genetic degeneration. This explains the data. This explains their divergence. That's where the old Earth creationist goes wrong, is they have to look at like the Neanderthals, which are clearly human in every way, and say they're an animal. They're without a spirit. They're without a soul. I'm sorry, but I can't accept that. That just seems, I don't think that that's an acceptable position.
Really anything afterwards. So, it's not how I see things, but there's some coherence to it. So I can go with that. And they're being upfront and honest about it.
Yeah, it's a cogent proposal from the position that they're coming from.
Yeah, and to be clear, we don't need this. There's no evidence that indicates this within science.
Right.
The only reason why a person would come to this is if they thought Scripture taught a particular thing.
Right.
Right. And that's okay. What we can do is say that, well, from a scientific point of view, we don't have evidence that really necessarily rules that out from what we've seen so far.
Right. There is no data set from science that precludes it. Is what
exactly. Now, what they'll also say too is people who know something about human evolution might be thinking, but wait a minute, don't we know that Homo sapiens also interbred with Neanderthals? But they're open to that too. They're saying that maybe that initial population that somewhat corresponds to what scientists mean by Homo sapiens, maybe not precisely the same thing. Kind of refers to the human mind, they're kind of forming, and yeah, there's some later interbreeding from Neanderthals and all that. So they potentially actually have a very reasonable position.
Right. It kind of weaves in.
I just covered why the position from the old Earth creationists on the Neanderthals, the so-called pre-humans, the hominids, the so-called hominin fossil record is actually is best explained through our biblical creation model of ancestry. And we've covered that in great detail. I won't spend too much time on that currently because we have in the past, and Swamidass is kind of just glossing over it. So no, let's just keep going.
And like a lineage for true humanity almost, and allows, once the departure from the garden occurs, potential crossover with the species that are existing outside of the garden as non-humans.
Yeah, it's interesting actually how they talk about this. This is a point of confusion. They still would call this a genetic sole progenitorship.
Okay.
Even though DNA is coming from other places. And so I was talking to AJ, you, and Fuzz, actually at the beginning of this year, we did a big workshop with them. And what they mean by sole genetic progenitorship isn't that we get all of our DNA from Adam and Eve.
Right.
But rather that the DNA that makes us human comes from Adam and Eve.
Yes, it's almost like a genetic basis for the idea that I've at least seen and held at one point from theistic evolutionists, that Adam and Eve are the first individuals with souls. Right.
Yeah, so that's similar to what they would say. To be clear, some Christians would say even dogs and all animals have souls too, but we would say like the first that had a human soul. Yeah.
Right. Yes, the first of being made in the image of God. Right.
Yeah, that's what they would say, and they're very, that's like really important to them. Once again, I think it's not that science tells us that their position is correct, but I don't know if the genetic evidence shows us that their position is wrong, especially because they modified the position in response actually to this time to most recent 4 alleles, right? Now, so we talked about 3 models. We'll talk about the 4th one, right? So the first one was homozygous clones, which is a straw man of their position strange.
Yes.
Second one is the idea of
the classic Stanford and Carter.
Yeah, where they're currently at, and we're actually, I would say this is also where reasons to believe was too, of saying that they're heterozygous people but normal biology, right? But then reasons to believe has moved, and because they actually engaged honestly, I think, with the time to most recent 4 allele data,
right?
Say, okay, well that data really does seem to indicate that Adam and Eve probably were mosaic, so we call it the genetic mosaic.
The time to most recent 4 allele data has been dealt with very easily. Actually, we've addressed all their arguments and objections. We've modeled out the Adam and Eve based on the starting point of design diversity. It's them now that are failing to address our questions, our objections. They're failing to actually address our predictions. And you're going to see that when we do our little video where Erica actually attempts to refute and point out problems in Jensen's active research program on the Y chromosome and the history of civilization. They're the ones that are failing. They're on the defense. If you haven't noticed, they're backed into a corner. They're constantly on the defense. They're never really answering the objections. Okay, so that's where we're at. He can pretend his TMR4A has not been dealt with, when in fact it has, because it starts off with a straw man argument anyways. Now he has to pretend that it hasn't been dealt with in order to avoid having to deal with his problems. They don't want to have to deal with their problems.
Or germline mosaic model. I think they are saying that Eve was a mosaic, but maybe not Adam. Whatever the case, there's some sort of mosaicism that's going on with Adam and Eve. Okay.
That's unique to the human population.
Yeah. But then after that, it's all normal.
Model 3 starts from the same position as Model 2 with the created heterozygous alleles that are unique, but allows for enough time, essentially fixing its problems. The issue is, not only is it now an old Earth creationist model, but it seems to arbitrarily decide where to apply real science. In the sense that a large timescale is required to get the diversity from this heterozygous pair, it's fine to allow for that, but there is no mechanism to give for these created heterozygous individuals in the first place.
The 4th way to handle it, which no one has gone to yet, they've just kind of maybe hinted and alluded at it, is that there is something seriously strange and funky going on with the early human population's DNA. It's something we don't actually observe in any other populations right now. Much higher rates of recombination, much higher. There's like other stuff, mechanisms that were at play, 6,000 years ago that we don't really even see anymore among the current populations. So potentially even miracles. So no one has gone to that position, but that's out there.
Right, and so that's a potential terminal end to this, right? Is to gesture at that and essentially say, look, we don't know that it didn't happen, because in science, right, there's this idea of finding.
Well, it depends. So if they're saying there's a natural mechanism to do that,
right?
Then we should see evidence of some of the things that they're proposing. So we can even say that we split up the things where there's a natural mechanism versus it's just like ongoing miracles.
Right.
If they're going to go to ongoing miracles, well, yeah, okay, so maybe that happened. I mean, there's no.
Where do you draw the line there, right?
Yeah, I think everything I've heard there is deeply implausible, but no leading creationist I know about has actually taken hold of that and said that's the way things work. They've gestured at it maybe many times, and maybe there's some people who don't really know their stuff very well who think that they've gone that way.
Right.
But that's not what they're at. They're actually more in a second model we discussed.
Right.
And I think
that's
that
what we're seeing a lot of younger creationists occupy currently.
yeah, and so we can talk now a little bit more about how the time to most recent 4 alleles and the time to most recent 10 alleles impacts this.
Model 4 is honest in its presentation, admitting that in order to get the required diversity in 6,000 years, you essentially need a biology in the progenitor couple that has never been seen in nature before, essentially magic biology. While it should be praised for its transparency, it's important to remember that in this model, there is very little that can be classified as empirical. And with that, the 4 models are essentially summed up. Only the conventional science model both works with the seen data and is indeed empirical, both in its initial conditions and where it ends up. Carter and Jeanson will eventually have to cop to this and move their model to Model 4, but of course that would be admitting that their model lacks empiricism and would no longer be scientific, something that Jeanson and Carter alike are very reluctant to do.
And so, I also want to put out, I'm not an older creationist. I'm not in the reasons to the world. I have no problem with God creating this.
So once again, they are saying there are problems where there are not. Almost like they want to force the creationists to have to admit that, hey, we're going to have to adopt an entirely new model. The allelic patterns we see today can be easily explained by the fact we see fast mutation rates. The recombination rates are perfectly in line with the Adam and Eve model. They're exceedingly fast in many African people groups because they have more working PRDM9 enzymes. We're going to go through that a little bit more later. And also gene conversion. They rarely mention gene conversion. Swamidass does briefly here, which can break up those design variants much faster, can help significantly. But yet for evolution to be true, as always, they want to ignore their problems. They need to slow these numbers down exponentially. We do not. The rates fit nicely. They don't want to address the phylogenetics when it comes to the uniparentally inherited DNA. This is where they have a major issue. So I want to get to where they say. I want to go into more detail on this breaking up of the design variants, the recombination rates. So let's see where this point is.
So it's not my view, but I do really respect how the reasons to believe folks have handled this. As when they really presented this evidence, they spent a lot of time engaging privately to understand it, and then they even did some public stuff engaging with it, and they modified their model to move from the second model we discussed to the third one.
Right.
And what they have, could be consistent with the data we saw from looking at more. And I think they're actually very intent on really trying to make sense of that.
Well,
so
before we move on quickly, it seems too that we've got, when we've got a hypothesis, right, in the realm of empirical science, you're looking at a hypothesis and then you're looking at the data set, and you might get data that supports the hypothesis. You have data that could potentially.
Exactly why our model, our hypothesis, is leading to accurate testable predictions. Erica finally attempted in this 3.5-hour video to address the data that shows that the predictions that flow from the hypothesis are working so well, and you're going to see us just demolish that. I'm actually looking forward to it. Matt and I were tempted to just do that today, but we're going to break it down piece by piece. This was supposedly their most difficult part. So why not start with that which is the most difficult, right? They brought their expert on, but that's the thing. We have a hypothesis that's working so well. They have hypotheses that are not working so well. They're not even making the necessary predictions. They're not addressing the necessary data.
Preclude it, right? And then you have data that neither supports nor precludes, and acts either potentially.
You'll notice that ever since, once we do the full Y chromosome dissimilarity rebuttal to her, you'll notice that it's been a major issue with the Y chromosome data when it comes to the humans, the chimps, the gorillas. And she just also glosses past it in this 3.5-hour video, which we're going to have fun with. That is, as I pointed out in our first debate, a differentiating line of evidence that is best and probably only explained from our model. And they have no real explanation other than storyboard. So she is right. There is lines of evidence that can differentiate between the models as compared to lines of evidence that are just agnostic. Both models can explain. And it's those differentiating lines of evidence that have not been explained by them.
Potentially in tandem or potentially not. It's agnostic. Yeah, it's agnostic to the hypothesis. So the first, our straw man argument is kind of out of the picture entirely, but our number 2 model by Jeanson, Sanford, and Carter is occupying the position of we think that some of the data could potentially support it, our hypothesis. But the problem is there are additional data sets that do indeed preclude.
There's data that supports it, exactly. I mean, I don't know. I don't think there's data that supports it.
I don't either, but that's what the.
Okay, so good. So we're at the Y chromosome section, guys. Make sure you go watch our video from yesterday. So we put out a 2-hour video. I did a live stream debunking this section. Okay, very important you go watch that. We just put out a 10-minute video breaking down this section because she reiterates it later. without Swamidass there. So there's two videos. You can watch the long version, you can watch the short version, you can watch both, whatever you guys want to do. So we're going to skip past this since we've already really demolished this. I challenge them to rebut our rebuttal to this part.
Is that they
Now we got to get
have
to their next part about, so bear with me while I find it. We're going
The studies that he picked weren't that high quality because they didn't actually have that high reads.
all right.
So Y
And
chromosome, high quality. So bear with me, guys. We're going to find the
we actually have a very good handle on these rates.
next section.
And they're not any.
Okay, here it is. So here's the final part.
Right.
And it turns out that until 2014, there wasn't really any method that could do it. In 2014, there was a paper that came out.
Oh, I went too far. Okay, right here. We'll start from here, guys, and then we'll annihilate this part.
Right. We lack a mechanism, and we lack anything close to a mechanism for that sheer magnitude of recombination.
Yeah, and maybe it could happen. I mean, we're talking about something that, it's just never been observed before.
Right, yeah, and that's the issue with this, right? Standing has attempted to counter the most recent 4 alleles problem with recombination in this attempt to stay in Model 2 territory, specifically by throwing his lifeline to the PRDM9 gene. This gene is responsible for positioning recombination hotspots during meiosis in humans. The proposition Standing makes is that Adam and Eve had far more of the functioning PRDM9 genes and thus more recombination hotspots, allowing them to bypass the most recent 4 alleles problem by using heavy recombination rates. He pitched this over at the Peaceful Science Forum, where he was promptly shut down. The conversation went a little something like this. Standing proposed his idea and was immediately called out by Steve Schaffner. I had the pleasure of chatting with Steve Schaffner on the Biologos Forum once, as he was one of the authors on the landmark 2005 initial sequencing of the chimpanzee genome paper. He said, quote, "That doesn't follow logically. Not at all. There are far more
What's funny is I responded to this, okay? And like I said, the interview with Swamidass was recorded obviously before I responded to all this, because they dodged in that blog like they always do. And in my response video, I actually went through what she's showing here and showing why they're wrong. I'm going to show you directly from the mainstream literature why they're wrong. Because remember, I've now dealt with, for the last hour, the TMR4A. I've posed a number of objections, arguments, and questions to them that they've been dodging, but they can't tap out so easily. What's funny is, why were they so surprised by this PRDM9 gene and the evidence? And now they are trying so desperately to deny that which is factual and empirical, when they want to say that they're fully up to date with the young earth creation literature. I showed in my rebuttal videos to this that she didn't address, I showed how creationists have actually been discussing this data for years and years. So why were they surprised if they're supposedly up to date? So definitely check those out, but I'll reiterate some of it here, but we're going to let this play out and then we'll go through it all.
Combination hotspots and crossovers per meiosis. There is no reason to think that their number has any effect on the probability that a crossover will occur, unquote. This was reiterated by Evograd, author of The Systematic Paradigm of Replacing Darwin. Evograd then went a bit deeper, essentially pointing out that Standing's proposal is nothing more than a concept presented as empiricism with no data to back it up.
A concept presented with no empiricism from Evograd, they're supposedly best, who I've demolished over and over again, says that Jensen doesn't root his tree. Nothing but a dishonest argument. He roots his tree on the L node. Rooting it on the L node leads to accurate testable predictions that are working so well. Okay, so here's her breakdown here.
For instance, no data exists to support 1, the notion that European PMDR9 genes are more broken than their African counterparts, 2, that Africans have more PMDR9 genes, as in their total number of copies, 3, that non-Africans are more recombination damaged than Africans, and 4, that recombination is responsible for the differences in African and non-African populations rather than the conventional science hypothesis that African populations are simply older. The analogy here would be suggesting that an ice age killed the dinosaurs. Yes, an ice age could have conceptually killed the dinosaurs, but all the data we have suggests that they weren't killed by an ice age. The data we have shows us that they were killed off by a combination of a massive impact event, widespread volcanism, and ultimately rapid climate change. Now, if you could show support for an ice age, then sure, we could consider it, we should consider it. But instead, in our real-world example, Standing points to data that already supports another hypothesis, that being the diversity gap between African and non-African populations, and gestures that instead, this data actually supports this other random creationist idea. And he leaves all the details that could potentially differentiate between the two hypotheses up to, I don't know, someone else. It's not empirical, plain and simple.
But the point that
Okay, so here we go. Let's deal with this. First, I want to start off, because I actually like credit where credit is due. I like the way Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal explained kind of the issue with breaking up the alleles. Starting with the created diversity model. So he explained it. So credit where credit is due, Dan. Now I addressed this, and I believe it was the video titled Linkage Disequilibrium. So please watch that. Yet another video that they ignored. Okay. So more or less, and I'm paraphrasing here, the argument would go, if I have a gene from mom and a gene from dad, and they're both different, they are heterozygous. Different alleles for that gene. Let's say the gene is 1,000 nucleotides. He said this in one of his videos. And 100 of them are different from each other. How many different alleles do I have in there? Dan says in order to get more than 2 alleles in that gene, we need recombination in there. And Dan says the rate of recombination is too slow to break all these different variants up to get so many different alleles. Right off the bat, gene conversion, as I've said over and over again, read about gene conversion. Gene conversion breaks them up faster, okay? Essentially, gene conversion would have also been more effective at the initial creation event, of course, when there was a genome that was perfect. And here's the thing, Swamidass would want to scoff at that, but yet he's saying, he's assuming the model of created heterozygosity, but he's obviously not assuming the perfect working genome that created heterozygosity would start with. Here's the thing. It's not a problem given what we know about what? Gene conversion, as I've said, as well as faster rates of recombination and the PRDM9 gene that they're saying doesn't work, and we're going to destroy that. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to reiterate this from earlier. God would have created, obviously, these beneficial, these helpful alternatives. God created these designed alternatives to allow for adaptation, change, variation from one generation to another. So obviously he would have placed those in helpful linkage groups, okay? Gene conversion then breaks up the variants faster. Now, when we assume the real created heterozygosity, created alleles would be designed, as I've stated, to recombine and segregate in the first place, okay? But also, these useful variants, these design differences, as I talk about, they would have originated at what? Low allelic frequencies? No, high allelic frequencies. I'm just going to quote Sanford here from Genetic Entropy. Sanford talks about how functional linkage groups and high allele frequencies. So remember, these things have been written by young Earth creationists for a long time now. Okay, so there's no excuse for straw manning the argument and using an argument that says it hasn't been dealt with. Functional linkage groups and high initial allele frequencies greatly enhance selection efficiency, thus enabling rapid local adaptation. Like an ordered deck of cards, the net information in such a scenario would be greatest at the beginning, but diversity would be greatest only after many cycles of shuffling. Except at the beginning, no new functional information would be required. So they failed to address all of our challenges, all of our questions, all of our objections. There's a good article on creation.com. I want to quote this as well, okay? So this is a good one. Homologous recombination is the name given to a large group of reactions during which the cell uses a stretch of DNA. Okay, this stuff is amazingly complex. Erica, how do you explain homologous recombination from an evolutionary perspective? I don't want the storyboard. Explain how this can come about. What type of evolutionary processes can evolve that which requires forward thinking? That's another question I'm sure we'll not get an answer to. And if we do, it'll be a storyboard. Okay, so these reactions during which the cell uses a stretch of DNA to alter a similar, a homologous sequence for several purposes, including repair and general editing. The cell's intention in performing these manipulations has been pre-programmed by the creator in much the same way as we program a computer to perform functions independent of further human input. What's going on in the genome in terms of the information, the level of information compression, the nested patterns, the function, the complexity, the nature of the genome is more complex than anything man has ever built in terms of engineering, in terms of computer. How do they explain that? I mean, it's amazing that they just want to point to these things like recombination, saying it's a problem for us. It's a problem for them. The origin of any of these things are a problem for them. Offspring are always genetically unique due to homologous recombination. Isn't that an amazing design feature? But we have only been able to recognize the most obvious products, and the desired outcomes remain theoretic. So I'm going to ask this question then. What type of evolutionary processes can evolve these amazingly designed mechanisms in the genome that require forward thinking, such as recombination? Let's see if they answer this. I am not interested in storyboards. I want empirical science. Here's the thing. Miracles are not necessary. I've iterated this earlier. They're saying that this is the case with the recombination. It's not necessary. It's the evolutionists that are the ones with the miracles, the chicken and egg problems that abound, for example. Let's get on to their issue of recombination. The TMR4 argument, if you've just got here, definitely check that. We've proven it to be a straw man argument and easily debunked. When it comes to the PRDM9, let me quote Dr. Carter, and it's from a paper, Carter and Powell, okay? Let me see if I'm not sure if I've got it up here. So what they say is, from the results of work done elsewhere by Carter, chromosome arms might have 0, 1, 2, or more clear recombinations per generation. And recombinations average just over 65 per individual per generation. Recombination is a well-known and well-characterized phenomenon controlled by the PRDM9 gene, which targets specific signal motifs in the genome. These motifs can degrade through mutation. They want to deny this for some reason, which makes no sense. Are they denying the nature of mutations? Is any of them going to say that man is not presently degenerating? Do they ignore, do they not believe in the nature of what happens when you get small populations, inbreeding, reductions of genetic variability? Do they not agree with all of this? Dr. Sanford, in his interview with Dr. Tour, talks about how he worked with at the same campus as, I believe it was Kondrashov. And I believe it was Kondrashov that admitted to Dr. Sanford that no serious population geneticist would disagree that man is presently degenerating. Do you see how they want to bluff all day, or they want to dodge the issues? So they say recombination is well controlled by PRDM9 gene. Those motifs can degrade through mutation. It is also known that recombination rates vary across the genome and among different groups of people. They are assuming constancy in recombination rates, when in fact there's no real empirical reason to assume that. Okay, so we've gone over those quotes, but I want to also point out the fact that I find it funny that they have to keep saying that this is magic biology, magic biology. I think this is to obfuscate the issue. Okay, as I was iterating in the little blog there, it is a fact. I mean, are they denying the fact that the PRDM9 is known to regulate, it controls, it influences recombination through these hotspots? If the PRDM9 is not functioning properly, are they denying that there are cases, just basic genetics would say that if mutations that are deleterious hit these important sites, they're not going to function properly? That's why there's so much now in the non-coding regions that are hit through mutations that lead to disease. This is what happens. Mutations are not good. Mutations are the destroyer, not the creator. This is why they want to continue straw manning. So this would actually hinder recombination. Think about it. And I broke this down in the blog that if you have more broken or lost PRDM9 sites, okay, the less enzymes there are to bind to different recombination hotspots, then what's going to happen? Well, obviously, it would provide less overall recombination as time goes on. This is just basic. Not to mention the long, long lives in the pre-flood world. I mean, recombination would have essentially, they're assuming constancy. They're looking at today and assuming that's how it was in the past, when things would have been vastly different. Vastly different, more fully working and fully functioning PRDM9 genes, more recombination events, more effective recombination. This is why in Africa, where people clearly have more PRDM9 genes and more recombinational hotspots, what do we see? We see more genetic diversity. They're retaining more diversity. Their genome is more shuffled, that they want to assume is due to the population supposedly being older. Okay, but I like to quote from their own literature. This is their fatal blow. Okay, here's a paper. Okay, I want them to actually read through this whole paper. I doubt that they have. Let's see. I think this is it right here. The landscape of recombination in African Americans. Now, I know this part's probably kind of dry and technical, but it's the nature of responding to what we're responding here. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so sound is good. Sound is good. So Conrad here says, is this as bad as the last one? Now, Conrad's the kind of atheist too, and we don't mind him. He's a nice enough guy. We've had some good conversations, but never provides rebuttals. Provide rebuttals to this paper here, Conrad, as I'm talking, and I'll respond. The landscape of recombination in African Americans, okay? Let's just quote their own mainstream journals to debunk them. So I'm going to quote a certain part from the paper. We have shown, remember, this isn't young earth creation literature here. We have shown that PRDM9 alleles that bind a novel 17 base pair motif and occur at greatly increased frequency in people of West African ancestry have led to what? A shift in the recombination landscape compared to people of non-African ancestry. The larger number of hotspots, okay, let me say it again. The larger number of hotspots, there's no other way to interpret this, available to West Africans implies, see, they don't want to go with the logical implications, okay? Less working PRDM9 spots. We can see a larger number of hotspots in Africans. They have a more shuffled genome. Therefore, even more working hotspots in the pre-flood peoples, the Adam and Eve that were created perfect with front-loaded genetic diversity would have had the most. It's just like mutation accumulation. We accumulate roughly 100 new mutations per person per generation in the nuclear DNA. Passed on, most of them unselectable because they're very subtle. Most mutations get missed by natural selection. Those are the ones that accumulate and degenerate. And it's all been verified through mathematical models, Mendel's accountant, for example. Populations over time degenerate more and more. Yeah, selection can get rid of the worst. Selection can amplify the best. But the thing is, mutations will always accumulate. There's no type of selection that can save living organisms from the inevitable genetic degeneration. This is a fact. Lucas says, can you link the paper in the chat? Yeah. You want me to do it right now? Okay, here, let's see. That's a good, honest question. So let me, this should work. Okay. Luca, for you, the world, my good man. So there you go. Share that around, guys. Read it. Okay, so they don't like the implications, the logical implications, because remember, no more TMR4A, now no more recombination problem, and combined with the fact that they failed to take the abiogenesis challenge, they fail to give arguments against the differentiating lines of evidence. That's it. They're done. They're done, and they're going to tap out. Let's see where, okay, so the larger number of hotspots available in West Africans implies that at the population level, crossovers are more evenly distributed than in Europeans. And thus the shorter extent of West African LD stands for linkage disequilibrium, is not due to differences in demographic history alone, such as the lack of an out of Africa founder event. There has been no robust answer to this, guys. None. Okay? Now let me break it down. Africans, they have more recombination hotspots. We know the PRDM9 gene helps initiate recombinational hotspots. The implications of this, okay, means that Africans would have more recombinational events, and that's what they see. Their genome is more shuffled. This does not mean that they are an older population, as Erica in this little section here thinks is the only explanation. Evolutionists are the most biased people you'll ever meet, and this is proof of it. Evolutionists seem to assume constancy in what? Gene conversion. They rarely mention gene conversion, breaks up these design variants fairly quickly. Recombination, mutational events, population history, differences in selective and environmental pressures. What else? They don't seem to consider demographics. When it comes to the coalescence, which they never addressed, they assume random mating. Okay, there was every reason Swamidass for evolution to expect. They never predicted it. Show me where they predicted the one Y chromosome line, where they predicted the mitochondrial DNA ancestor. No, there's every reason to believe, if evolution was true, that what we would have seen in the genetic data was a diversity, multiple diverse Y chromosomal lines, multiple diverse mitochondrial DNA lines, some of them being even shared with the chimps. But no, that's not what we found. What we discovered was perfectly consistent with the biblical creation model. It actually had to be true if biblical creation was true. So demographics they need to consider. Africans, we already know. They have had totally different histories, even according to their own model. According to our model, post-Babel, they would have had different histories than non-Africans. The people moving into Africa versus the people moving into Europe would have had a totally different history. Okay, they can't assume all of these constancies here. Different mutational events as well. Instances of inbreeding and intermarrying would have also been different. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. I explained this to Erica in our third debate. I actually brought up gene conversion, recombination. I said more or less the same thing in our debate. So here's the thing. If non-Africans have fewer of these sites, as the evidence seems to suggest, are they going to deny this? Then we should expect evidence for fewer recombination rates. Yes, they're going to have to deny, but we don't. We're comfortable with this data. Okay? So here's the thing. There are many reasons why Africans may appear, quote unquote, older, but this is all based on evolutionary assumptions, presuppositions, and does not consider the facts that I've already mentioned. Let's look at it in our model now. We have a starting point of created heterozygosity. God front loads Adam and Eve with these functional design variants that are put there in helpful linkage groups to segregate and to recombine and lead to variation, change, adaptation. We've got more functioning and working PRDM9 genes, okay, in the pre-flood world at creation, for example. This would have worked to produce more effective recombination events, leading to more scrambling and diversity. We can actually see this in the African people groups to see that this was the case. This is a logical inference. This isn't even a storyboard. Okay? Now we're looking at different population histories, of course, different environmental conditions, different mutational events, as I've mentioned before. This has led to Africans retaining more of the original PRDM9 genes than non-Africans. Europeans seem to have interbred and intermarried, very interbred. Now, here's the thing. Read this. I'm tempted to just go through this entire paper, but I've gone through an important part. And in humans and many other species, recombination is not evenly distributed across the genome, but instead occurs in hotspots. It is known that a major determinant of the positions of recombination hotspots is PRDM9, a meiosis-specific histone methyltransferase whose zinc finger domain binds DNA sequence motifs. In Europeans, PRDM9 zinc finger arrays are predominantly of two similar types, A and B. In contrast, 36% of West African alleles are not of the A or B type. So you can go into the crossover activity here. There's one part I wanted to see. Let's see if I can find it. To understand the features of recombination in West Africans that differ from Europeans, we estimated the degree to which each African-American person's crossovers occur in African-enriched hotspots compared with shared hotspots, a phenotype we refer to their African enrichment. One part here I wanted to show you guys before we end it here. Given there are further influential PRDM9 variants, this gene may thus explain almost all differences in local rate between the West African and European populations. Right here. We have shown that PRDM9 alleles that bind a novel 17BP motif and occur at greatly increased frequency in people of West African ancestry. This is what I read earlier. Have led to a shift in the recombination landscape compared with people of non-African ancestry. So here's the thing, guys. There's nothing magical. They're the ones that are dodging. They're the ones that weren't up to date on this. So now they feel like they need to just harp on things that we've already addressed that are logical, empirical, in order to avoid answering our questions. Okay, guys, I'm so excited to address the Y chromosome dissimilarity with chimps and humans that she dodged on. I want to show a clip again, because clearly these guys cannot refute it. And Swamidass literally had a question. Swamidass in this peaceful discourse, go watch my other video on this. I actually went in more detail than I did today, where I actually went through the entire blog. Swamidass asked a question that Carter answers in this exact video. I'm going to play this video since they can't refute it. And Carter goes in incredible detail, especially near the end. He answers a question that Swamidass had in terms of an argument about Europeans versus Africans. Watch how so he either didn't watch the video or did watch the video but didn't pay attention.
Set the letters on the chromosome.
Let's see. We'll start right from the beginning of the question. Okay, here we go, guys.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button. Because
George Bond, thanks for supporting the SFT family, brother. He says, I'm not falling for your trap, SFT. That's awesome. Luca, I'm glad you got it, man. If you want to read it, you can give us your thoughts later. It's a fascinating paper. There's still so little we understand. But my question is, if they want to continue scoffing at these processes, these genetic processes like recombination, gene conversion, tell me how you can evolve these forward-thinking mechanisms that are so amazingly designed in the first place. Another challenge they're going to fail.
because we are just getting started.
Notice how this Conrad came in here. Pretty sure he's another troll and just made a random comment, but no rebuttal as always. It's all over his head. He doesn't like the confidence that we have as creationists in our position, in defending our position and refuting the evolution position that suggests banana plants and whales are related through common ancestors. It's not science.
We can still use it if we want to.
Okay.
All right.
Well, when it comes to recombination, it's been asserted that the rates are too slow to account for the de novo creation of Adam and Eve just around 6,000 years ago. Is this an argument you cross?
Well, what's the recombination rate? It depends on. We used to think it was random. It's not. It's controlled by a gene. The PRDM9 enzyme looks for a specific set of letters on the chromosome, grabs onto it, and recombines.
Ah, okay.
Africans have more of those sites than Europeans.
They can't deny that Africans have more sites than these Europeans. They can't deny that recombination is essentially non-random. Okay, they can't deny these things. It sounds like they want to deny the fact that these highly essential gene sites, genes in general that are highly functional and essential, when they're hit by mutations, which are overwhelmingly deleterious, they are going to work to damage those sites. They are going to work to lead to disease. They want to play dumb. Evolutionists, when they're backed into a corner, what they do now is play dumb. So their audience can think, oh, wow, they responded with a 3.5-hour video. Oh, they must have refuted Standing for Truth. No, they dodged the entire video. They didn't even answer any of the questions. And Luca in the chat, I appreciate your objectivity. I appreciate that Luca actually watches both sides just to see which questions are being answered, which ones are not being answered. Okay, here we go.
Oh, wow.
Whoa, wait a minute now. Hold it. That messes up the molecular clock right there. Because if you have more recombination per generation, your population can hold more diversity. You have more pieces of DNA in the population. So
notice that you would have more pieces of DNA in the population.
How long ago was this out of Africa event? Well, I don't know. If Africans have more recombination, they're going to look older just because of the amount of recombination.
Are they denying that they've had more recombination means they're going to look older? But remember, they just want to assume their position. and then bring forth biased arguments, but then not answer the arguments at their position, like all the major problems with the out of Africa scenario to begin with. They didn't even attempt to answer my question I've asked numerous times about why are there so many large linkage blocks? What we know about gene conversion and crossing over, for example, okay, what we know about these shuffling mechanisms of the genome, if we've really been shuffled for millions of years, and then they had their bottleneck, which reduced the genetic diversity of people groups, you're still looking at hundreds of thousands of years. The genome should actually be more shuffled than we see. No, the reason why we still have so many large linkage blocks is because the genome is not as old as they say they are. It is, because there hasn't been as much recombination and gene conversion and shuffling events as they say there's been. They didn't even attempt to answer that question. Although it is a 3.5-hour video, maybe I missed it, but I was pretty thorough.
Right.
And because mutation will destroy the PRDM9 sites over time, it's much more likely.
Insert username. Thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it, guys. You guys are awesome. You make this all worthwhile. This is to bring people to the truth, bring people to the gospel of Jesus Christ, get them saved ultimately. You know, you can win arguments all day, but it's about winning souls. It's about bringing people to the truth that Jesus Christ has revealed through his word. So that's the most important thing, is to bring people to salvation. We want to see them in heaven with us.
I forget what the letter combination is, but it's much more likely to destroy it than to create it through a mutation.
Here's something they completely dodge, like everything else. Explain the origin of these highly essential genes. Mutations break down. It's much easier to break something down than build it up. Okay, you start with a genome that's fully functioning, that's created, which is the better alternative. Far more plausible, because their abiogenesis story is dead. Chicken and egg problem after chicken and egg problem. This is why we brought forth the challenge to begin with, that they've avoided. Have them put out a video saying, we are not going to take the abiogenesis challenge, and maybe we'll stop harping on it. But now they have no excuse for not assuming the created heterozygosity starting point. Not the made up one like Swamidass does, but the real created heterozygosity model.
So our recombination rate should be slowing down over time.
So that's what the empirical science suggests, based on all of these facts we've covered. Recombination rates are slowing down over time, but this is all new to them. They're not as up to date as they want you to think. So now they have to come together and build their storyboard and deny, play dumb, essentially. I'm not saying they're dumb. They're very smart. You know, Erica's a very intelligent person, but here's the thing. They have to pretend like this doesn't exist. They have to pretend there's not an answer. They can't give in. They can't give in, nor do we really think God can do anything. You know, we would love to see them come to salvation, but a lot of people, as the Bible says, are willingly ignorant. They don't want to see this evidence. When the evidence is presented to them or the arguments are provided, it goes in one ear and out the other. Okay, because admitting that the science is consistent with the Bible's account of human origins means now they have to take the Bible as truth. And the Bible has a lot of rules. The Bible is where we look to for salvation. And apparently they don't want that. So, okay, so that would, and so many good points there that it brings a couple questions to mind. So that would, in effect, I've heard the critics say, okay, you know, the higher levels of genetic diversity found in Africa means Africans are older than non-Africans, but they also look to linkage blocks between Africans and non-Africans, that they look at that and try and say that Africans are an older population as well, and use that to support the out of Africa theory. So that looks like the recombination rates would help with those arguments.
Yeah. Plus, we don't know how many people went to Africa after the flood. We don't know how many different groups migrated down there. It looks like there was a massive replacement of people in Eurasia. As the farmers learned how to farm in the Middle East, they started spreading out, and they replaced Neanderthals, they replaced the Denisovans.
This was the portion that was well understood by Rahmat and myself. But Swamidass put forth an argument or a question that this section here directly answered. The question is, are the evolutionists, are the critics, are the skeptics, are they actually looking for an answer to their questions? Or are they just asking a question in hopes that it's a knockout punch, that it's a knockdown argument? Because if so, then that's not really them engaging in sophisticated dialogue, but also engaging in honest debate.
Replace the ancient hunter-gatherers. Most Europeans in ancient times had dark skin and blue eyes. We see that in all their DNA. And all of a sudden, there's this massive replacement of...
Brother George, the man with the plan. Thank you so much. I hope you had a good walk with your dog today. Thanks for the super chat. George says, the Evo's last great act of defiance. Deny, dismiss, and reject. Time for repentance. Amen. Brother Nephilim Free, good to see you. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. sharp, the flood master, the flood expert himself, Nephilim Free, will be here debating Derek Barnes, the great Genesis flood debate. I'm pumped. Anytime Neff comes on for a debate, I am pumped. The guy has taught me so much. So God bless you, Nephilim Free. Brother Anthony says, SFT, they will prove all their hypothesis. One day they must believe that because it's their religion. Yeah. You know, I always say, eventually you will be converted. Unfortunately, there may be a time where it's too late. Every knee shall bow. Okay, let's continue.
Light-skinned people as they came in with farming. So we can't necessarily look at modern people and this is what their population looked like. Europeans specifically, we're inbred. We're one of the most inbred large populations on the planet. Europeans came from a very small population group that took over a large area.
Do they deny what happens during inbreeding? How levels of heterozygosity are reduced, levels of homozygosity are increased. The fact that a lot of deleterious mutations that were in a recessive state can now become manifested. What will happen is rapid and accelerated genetic degeneration at times, which of course, logically, what is going to happen to those PRDM9 sites over time in a fallen world, in these scenarios that involve inbreeding? I mean, come on, you know, this stuff's not that hard. And that's why I love you guys on this channel. I mean, you guys see it. You guys see the truth. You see this is not difficult. And this series is going to be awesome. I mean, we're going to go through it line by line. We covered another, 45 minutes today, maybe. Yesterday, we did a solid 20, 25 minutes of it. Guys, you got a lot to look forward to. It's going to be awesome.
There's not a lot of genetic diversity in Europe compared to specifically Africa or even the Middle East.
Yeah, I saw one of their papers that was recently written. They discovered what they call cheddar man, and he had black skin.
Well, when those letters appear in modern people, they're associated with darker skin tones. But it's not perfect. 23andMe.com says I'm supposed to have blue eyes. I don't have blue eyes, but I carry a variant that's very strongly associated with blue eyes. So the
Big Bad Todd, he, their savior, SWE, asked a question about that same thing in my debate the other day. Let's see. Put this on 2 times speed to make sure we're getting through it quick. I'm telling you, when you watch these videos, like when I'm watching their 3.5 hour videos to debunk them, I'm watching it at 2 times speed. When you're done watching it at 2 times speed, everything else for the next couple hours feels like you're living in slow motion. It's a weird feeling.
For all those who appreciate the work we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
So here's the question for SFT is, are you suggesting that their recombination rates were higher in the past?
Okay, now here's the thing. The PRDM9 sites, the paper that I was showing where the Africans, there's that paper, The Landscape of Recombination in African Americans. PRDM9 alleles common in West Africans and rare in Europeans. Sites of this motif are predicted to be risk loci for disease-causing genomic rearrangements in individuals carrying these alleles. More generally, this map provides a resource for research in human genetic variation, where they have more of those sites, and they have evidence for more recombination. They have more genetic diversity. And the evidence suggests, I'm pulling up the paper here, here it is, PRDM9 controls activation of mammalian recombination hotspots. There's more hotspots in African people groups. That's why they have more genetic diversity. Now, here's the thing. Mutations actually break down those enzymes, those PRDM9 sites. That means in the past, you would have had more, and therefore you would have had more recombination. More recombination means that population can retain what? It can retain. This is why they have to fight nonstop against the science of genetic degeneration. I'm sorry, evolutionists. You're just going to have to accept the fact that man is presently degenerating. Mutations are not the creator. They are the destroyer. Okay?
More genetic diversity. And this is right from the secular literature. I got 4 papers here that talk about it. So yeah, in the past, there would have been more recombination because you had more of the enzymes that help control recombination and activate those recombination hotspots. So I hope that answered the question. Good question, though. Really good question.
So simple, so easy. So simple and so easy that you would think even an evolutionist could understand. They can't say that we didn't answer the question. This has been a systematic breakdown of Swamidass. Make sure you watch the first part of this. I know there's another clip. So there's the recombination rates.
The power of evolution is unique to the United States. I mean,
I know there's another
technological
clip I wanted to show you guys. Here we go. So the fact that, too much diversity, right? These regions where there's more than a couple alleles. Once again, no scientific basis for. Why is there too little diversity? Another question
what
that
about
they're dodging.
variable regions in the genome where they find more than 400 alleles? Can this all be genetic diversity explained by the biblical timeframe?
Yeah, in fact, usually when they're talking about that, they're talking about the HLA alleles, which are part of the immune system. Our immune system is designed to rearrange DNA to make new antibodies. Now, those aren't necessarily inherited, but it's a highly adaptable portion of the genome. And look, we've had 6,000 years. There's 7 billion people in this world. If you take everyone's family tree and go back in time, we have all these independent branches in the family tree where lots of mutations can happen. So take a gene, if a gene's, let's say, pick a number, 10,000 letters long.
Remember, this was Dan's knockdown argument. Haven't heard much from this since. There is a reason for the hope that is in us. There's a scientific defense for these things. And it's amazing how consistent the scientific data is with the claims made in the Bible, made specifically in regards to human origins, the origins of the universe. And I say it over and over again, these things did not have to come back to be true, and yet they did. My question is, why aren't they answering any of the questions? Why are they dodging? Is this an admission that they don't have answers, guys? Think about that. Think about that long and hard. Maybe they don't have answers and they know it.
There's 10,000 places for a mutation to happen. If one letter change in one place makes a new allele, another letter change in another place makes another allele. It's not a big deal. Of course, there's allelic diversity. And
it almost makes you wonder if they even understand the basics of allele diversity. Someone like Dan's an evolutionary biologist. You think he would. But why bring forth such a straw man argument? I don't understand it. And why bring forth arguments that have been directly addressed through numerical simulations, through mathematical modeling, through highly technical young earth creation technical papers? I don't understand it.
Usually when they say there's all this diversity, they don't tell you what the frequency of these alleles is. Most of these things are incredibly infrequent. They're extremely rare. They're a brand new mutation that happened in Tajikistan or in Patagonia or in Sweden. And it's only one family or in one tribe or in one country or one region. So most of these things are vanishingly rare to the point where you're like, okay, whatever, it's a new mutation. Why is that a big deal when there's 7 billion people? In fact, it's kind of shocking there's so little diversity amongst us. In fact, we have probably 1/5 or 1/10 of the genetic diversity of chimpanzees.
That's a good point.
A lot fewer chimpanzees in the world.
Why so little? That's the question. Okay, last video, guys. Leave no stone unturned. The other issue they like to say is with blood groups, blood types. So we're going to address this one, and then we're going to call it a night for this exact issue. Guys, you are going to love. I can't wait to get to the Y chromosome dissimilarity issue with chimps and humans. Erica's arguments were, I was expecting better. And we're also really, really going to tackle her claims. Finally, they attempted to address Dr. Jensen's research program on the Y chromosome, the series he has that they are pretending to have any understanding about. You can clearly see it in their arguments. That's going to be to come as well. Lots to look forward to. So let's end it here with the blood groups from Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. This was an amazing interview. Please check it out. Let's do it. People in the chat with questions coming in. Me personally, there's one question I didn't really get a chance to ask, and I think it would be good for the audience to hear an answer to, because I personally enjoyed your what you've had to say on the origin of blood types. And you know that critics, I've seen it personally, they often point to all the different blood types as a way to counter the young earth creation position, and I think more specifically trying to refute. Here's why these guys only want to try and trick and oftentimes deceive people that are maybe not quite familiar with how to answer these arguments. You know, with us that are really, that we find creation apologetics to be important, you know, and we're putting out videos and material to defend the faith, to show why you're not related to a banana plant. They don't like us informed creationists because we show them that there's an answer. But not only that, we even show, watch my debate with RJ Downard on Adam and Eve. He supposedly is as up to date. He's more up to date than other creationists, apparently. Then you show how not up to date they are. That's why they use straw man arguments. They're not reading creationist literature.
A scientific Adam and Eve. Can you briefly touch on that topic, maybe, and how to best refute it?
Okay, I mean, the main blood groups are the A, B, and O. Those are the ones that people know. The next best known are the rhesus ones. But over 20 years ago, I wrote an article about blood types and their origin, and I more recently followed up with talking about Adam and Eve's blood type in particular. And I think what God did was create A and B. These are special things on your blood that they're actually they're antigens. So you've got some ability to respond to certain things. And the O blood group seems to be a mutation of the A blood group, has lost a certain antigen. So I mean, universal donor blood is O blood. You see, it's O negative, so it means it can be donated to anyone without actually causing a reaction. There's nothing to cause an antigenic reaction. Like you can't give A blood to a B type person; that would actually cause a fatal reaction. Now, if you're lucky enough to be A, B, any type of blood can be given to you. So I think Adam and Eve were probably created as A, B, and somewhere before the flood, A was mutated and formed O. So you got some people who were A and O, so their phenotype would be A, and some would be and O. But when they married, some of their kids would have been O on both their mothers and their father's side, and therefore you got people with O type blood. And it must have happened before the flood because O is so widespread around the world. It must have been a mutation that happened really early on. You see, blue eyes, blonde hair, that happened later. It was only found in certain groups. I think that would have happened after Babel in a particular group of Indo-Europeans, for instance. But the O blood group is so widespread, it must have happened really early. Now, why this would happen, why mutation would be good, I can only speculate. But here's one thing I saw, is that the coronavirus seems to affect blood types in a different way. Okay, I don't think it's been published yet. They talk about how the O blood might be less susceptible to certain attacks. In fact, we know, for instance, that some immunity to HIV is because of a mutation that removes a receptor from the cell that the virus usually latches onto. But if you've got the mutation removed, maybe the virus can't attack you. Maybe something that happened in the very early human population, some sort of disease that affected the O type less than the A type, and that's how the O type became so prevalent as it is now. It's a speculation, but I'm not speculating. O is definitely a mutation of A. That's pretty much accepted. It's a down mutation, doesn't do us any harm. Right. My blood type is O, okay, just so you know. My wife is O.
So it doesn't really have any.
Okay, guys, this has been fun. I hope it was thorough enough. I think it's been a pretty systematic demolition of another part of their video. So, boom. A couple hours have gone by. Thank you for sticking with me, guys. I've had some fun. I hope you've had some fun as well. Message me with questions or anything like that. And tomorrow, Genesis flood debate, Derek Barnes versus Nephilim Free. So, guys, Standing for Truth is out. I'm going to get some dinner. Have a blessed night as well. Once again, thanks for joining. Antonio, Brother Antonio Z, thank you so much for being here. So, guys, definitely check out the video from yesterday. Check the playlist, Refuting the Critics, if you're new to the channel. And for now, Standing for Truth is out. God bless.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.